the grim darkness of the far future, where humanity wages eternal war against countless horrors, and where even the stars themselves have become battlefields soaked in blood and horror, there exist creatures so massive, so incomprehensibly vast, that entire ecosystems flourish within their bodies. These are the void whales, the silent titans of the empty dark, creatures born not from evolution's patient hand, but from the churning madness of the warp itself. They swim through the lightless void between stars, solitary leviathans drifting through an ocean without water, breathing vacuum as easily as you breathe air, existing in a state that defies every natural law humanity once believed immutable. Imagine, if you will, a creature so enormous that standing on its surface, you could not tell you were upon a living thing at all. Picture a being 12,000 kilometers in length, nearly as long as the diameter of Earth itself, its body a living continent of flesh and bone drifting through space with terrible, inexorable purpose. These are not the gentle giants of ancient Terran oceans, swimming peacefully through warm currents rich with plankton and life. No, the void whales of Warhammer 40,000 exist in a universe that shows no mercy to the weak, no kindness to the innocent, and no rest for any living thing. They are born into suffering. They live in isolation and constant peril, and when they die, their corpses become resources to be harvested, their bodies picked clean by scavengers both mortal and demonic. The void whale knows no peace. It knows no safe harbor, no moment of true rest, no companionship save for the parasites that burrow through its flesh. Every moment of its existence is a struggle against the cold and airless dark, against the predators that hunt it, against the countless races that see it not as a living being, but as prey to be killed or resources to be mined. The void whale cannot speak, cannot plead for mercy, cannot negotiate or reason with those who would destroy it. It can only swim, endlessly, through the black between the stars, hoping somehow to survive another day in a galaxy that wants nothing more than to consume it entirely. This is the grim life of a void whale in Warhammer 40K, and to understand it is to understand one of the universe's most fundamental truths. In the 41st millennium, there is no such thing as a peaceful existence. There are only varying degrees of suffering, and the void whales, perhaps more than any other creatures, embody the cruel indifference of a cosmos that creates life only to torture it. They are the forgotten titans, the ignored leviathans, drifting through darkness while the galaxy burns around them, noticed only when someone wants to kill them, harvest them, or use them as weapons. Their story is one of loneliness on a scale difficult for human minds to comprehend, of isolation so complete that entire generations of void whales might live and die without ever encountering another of their kind. These creatures represent something profound in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. They are living proof that not all horrors in this galaxy are intentional, that not all suffering requires malice. Sometimes the universe simply creates beings whose very existence is a form of torment, creatures too large to hide, too valuable to be left alone, too alien to be understood or pitied. The void whales swim through space as they have for millennia uncounted, silent witnesses to wars and atrocities beyond number. Their minds, if they can be said to possess minds at all, processing a reality so different from our own that we can barely imagine what they experience as they drift through the eternal night. Let us journey, then, into the life of these impossible creatures. Let us explore the grim reality of beings who live in the vacuum of space, who navigate the insanity of the warp, who serve as unwilling hosts to entire ecosystems of parasitic horrors, and who are hunted by every major power in the galaxy for reasons ranging from sport to survival to simple, mindless hunger. This is their story, or rather, this is what we know of their story, pieced together from scattered Imperial records, orc tales told around guttering fires, Mechanicus research notes, and the accounts of those rare few who have encountered these titans and lived to tell of it. The void whales swim on, heedless and eternal, and the galaxy continues its bloody work around them. But for this moment, we will turn our attention to these forgotten giants, these living islands in the sea of stars, and attempt to understand what it means to be a void whale in a universe designed to destroy anything that dares to exist within it. Origin and nature. Born from the Imperium. The void whales are not natural creatures, not in any sense that evolution or natural selection would recognize. They were not shaped by millions of years of adaptation to their environment. They did not crawl from primordial seas or evolve from smaller aquatic ancestors. No, the void whales were born from something far stranger and more terrible than mere biology. They are creatures of the warp, spawned in the churning energies of the Imperium itself, that impossible realm where physics bends and breaks, where thoughts become tangible and nightmares walk with substance. They emerged from those psychic currents like dreams made flesh, impossibilities given form, creatures that should not exist, but somehow do. The Imperium, that roiling sea of souls and madness that underlies reality like an infection beneath healthy skin, occasionally produces entities that can exist in both its own twisted realm and in the material universe. The void whales are among these rare beings, creatures born in the warp but capable of manifesting in real space, swimming through vacuum with the same ease they navigate the impossible tides of the Imperium. This dual existence makes them unlike almost any other creature in the galaxy. They are not demons, bound to the warp and able to manifest only through great effort or sacrifice. They are not purely material beings, limited to the physical laws of real space. They exist between, in a state that defies easy categorization, their bodies and souls intertwined in ways that even the most learned Mechanicus Magos biologists struggle to comprehend. When a void whale emerges from the warp into real space, the transition is not subtle. Reality itself seems to ripple and distort as these massive entities force their way through the barrier between dimensions. Ship crews have reported seeing the very fabric of space twist and buckle before a void whale materializes, its enormous bulk suddenly occupying a volume of space that moments before had been empty. Some witnesses describe a sensation of pressure, as though reality itself is straining to accommodate something that shouldn't quite fit within its laws. Others report hallucinations, brief flashes of impossible colors and shapes that sear themselves into their minds before fading as the void whale fully manifests. The physical form of a void whale defies simple description, though countless attempts have been made to catalogue and understand these creatures. Most void whales are approximately 12,000 Terran kilometers in length, though this measurement comes with significant caveats. Size in the warp is not constant, not fixed, and void whales that have spent extended periods in the Imperium may manifest in real space at wildly varying scales. Some reports suggest void whales as large as small moons or even planets, though many Mechanicus researchers believe these accounts to be exaggerations or the result of warp-induced hallucinations. Other sources indicate that void whales can be as small as a few kilometers, perhaps juveniles, or perhaps simply smaller variants of the species, if species is even the right word for beings born from the warp. What is consistent, across all accounts, is that void whales possess bodies of immense bulk and strange composition. They are not simply giant fish or space-dwelling cetaceans. Their forms are alien, disturbing even, with anatomies that seem to follow rules different from those governing normal life. Some descriptions speak of vast, undulating bodies covered in chitinous plates that reflect starlight in sickly, iridescent patterns. Others describe skin that appears almost translucent in places, revealing internal organs that pulse and shift with their own nauseating rhythm. Still others report that void whales possess what appear to be multiple heads, or structures that might be heads, though whether these are sensory organs, feeding apparatus, or something else entirely remains unknown. The most disturbing aspect of void whale biology, and the one that has caused the most consternation among those who study them, is their radioactive nature. Mechanicus genitors, who have analyzed void whale remains, cutting open the massive corpses to examine their internal structure, have discovered that much of the creature's flesh and organs are naturally radioactive. The reasons for this remain unclear. Some theorize that the transition between warp and real space imparts this radioactive quality, that the dimensional stresses involved in such travel leave permanent marks on the creature's tissues. Others suggest that void whales feed on stellar radiation or absorb energy from the stars themselves, accumulating radioactive isotopes in their bodies over the centuries of their existence. Whatever the cause, this radioactivity makes void whale flesh inedible to nearly every species in the galaxy. Even orcs, whose constitution allows them to consume things that would kill any other living being, cannot digest void whale meat without suffering severe consequences. The flesh literally poisons those who attempt to eat it, flooding their systems with lethal radiation that can kill even the hardiest organisms. Only the Tyranids, those all-consuming horrors from beyond the galaxy's edge, possess the biological adaptations necessary to consume void whale flesh without harm. Their hyperadaptive biology can process the radioactive tissues, breaking down the dangerous isotopes and incorporating the usable nutrients into their own biomass. This radioactivity serves as a form of passive defense, though whether it evolved as such or is simply a byproduct of the void, whales' strange biology, is impossible to say. A predator that kills a void whale and attempts to feed on it will find itself consuming its own death, the radioactive flesh burning through its system like acid. But this defense is far from perfect. Many hunters do not seek to eat void whales. They hunt them for sport, for glory, for the challenge of killing something so massive. Others hunt them for resources that can be harvested from their bodies without consuming the flesh itself. And the radioactivity does nothing to protect void whales from those who simply wish to destroy them, to eliminate potential navigational hazards, or to clear space lanes of obstructions. The internal structure of void whales is a nightmare of impossible biology. Their bodies are not simply scaled-up versions of normal organisms. They possess organs and systems that serve no obvious purpose, structures that seem to violate basic principles of physics and biology. Some dissections have revealed what appear to be secondary or even tertiary circulatory systems. Networks of vessels pumping fluids that analysis shows to be only partially composed of matter as we understand it. Other examinations have found organs that seem to generate or regulate psychic energy, structures that glow with warp light even after death, continuing to pulse and function as though unaware their host has expired. Perhaps most disturbing are the discoveries of what Mechanicus researchers have termed dimensional pockets within void whale bodies, spaces that are larger on the inside than their external dimensions should allow. These pockets create labyrinths within the creature's flesh, vast chambers and tunnels that seem to connect to nowhere, spaces where the normal laws of geometry do not apply. It is within these impossible spaces that the parasites and ecosystem creatures that infest void whales often make their homes, living in architectural nightmares of flesh and bone that shift and change with the host's movements through space and warp alike. The skin of a void whale is perhaps its most valuable feature, at least from the perspective of those who would exploit these creatures. Void whale hide is covered with a complex mesh of nervous tissue directly linked to their central nervous system. When a void whale enters the warp, this tissue becomes stimulated by the creature's brain and secondary nerve ganglia, generating a psychic field around the entire body. This field functions similarly to a Geller field, the technology human ships use to protect themselves from the predatory entities and reality warping effects of warp travel. The void whale's natural ability to generate such protection has made their skin highly valuable to certain factions, particularly those seeking to construct ships or structures that can withstand warp exposure without conventional Geller technology. The Leagues of Votan, those long-lost offshoots of humanity who dwell in the galactic core, have become particularly adept at harvesting and utilizing void whale skin for this purpose. They have developed what they call the W-isorag pattern anti-warp hull, constructed using treated void whale hide as a key component. This gives their vessels an additional layer of protection against warp predation, allowing them to navigate even the most turbulent regions of the Imperium with greater confidence than most other factions. Of course, this means that to the Leagues of Votan, every void whale represents potential raw materials, a resource to be harvested, rather than a living being to be preserved. Life in the endless dark. To understand the existence of a void whale is to contemplate a form of life so alien, so fundamentally different from anything we know, that the very attempt strains the limits of imagination. These creatures do not breathe in any conventional sense. They require no oxygen, no atmosphere, no protective environment of any kind. They exist in hard vacuum, their massive bodies perfectly adapted to the airless cold of interstellar space, somehow maintaining the complex biological processes necessary for life without any of the supporting systems that all known organisms require. How they accomplish this remains one of the great mysteries surrounding these entities. Mechanicus researchers have proposed countless theories, from the absorption of stellar radiation for energy to the direct conversion of warp energy into biological sustenance, but no definitive answer has ever been established. The void whale's movement through space is equally mysterious and disturbing to witness. They do not propel themselves with fins or flukes as aquatic creatures do. They do not use jets of expelled material like cephalopods or some spacecraft. Instead, they seem to glide through the vacuum with a terrible, majestic grace, their enormous bodies undulating in slow, rhythmic waves that should not be possible in the absence of a medium to push against. Observers have described the motion as hypnotic, almost mesmerizing, watching these titans drift past with movements that seem to follow no physical law. Some theorize that void whales manipulate gravity fields to propel themselves, warping space-time around their bodies to create currents they can ride. Others suggest they use the same psychic abilities that protect them in the warp to move through real space, literally willing themselves forward through an exercise of unconscious psychic might. What little is known about void whale feeding comes primarily from observations of their behavior near stellar bodies and gas giants. Void whales have been documented approaching these objects and appearing to absorb material from their outer atmospheres or coronas. They position themselves at the edge of a gas giant's atmosphere or within the corona of a star, their massive forms holding position for weeks or even months at a time. During these periods, visible distortions can be seen around what appear to be feeding apertures on the creature's body, as though they are drawing in massive quantities of gas, stellar wind, or radiation. Whether this represents actual feeding in a nutritional sense, or some other process like refueling their ability to move through space, remains uncertain. Some accounts speak of void whales possessing what witnesses describe as pseudomouths, vast cavities dotted with vertical wool-like structures that the creature can seal shut. These descriptions come primarily from those who have seen Osradian void whales, a regional variant found in specific sectors of the galaxy. These mouths, if they can be called such, apparently serve to intake massive quantities of gas and meteoric material from nebula and planetary atmospheres. The void whale processes this matter through some internal mechanism, extracting whatever it needs and expelling the rest. Observers have noted that void whales seem to feed most intensively at gas giants, using their fins or similar structures to stabilize themselves in the upper atmosphere while they gorge on the rich atmospheric gases. The solitary nature of void whale existence is one of its most fundamentally grim aspects. These are not social creatures. They do not form pods or herds, do not mate for life, do not even seem to seek out others of their kind except in the rarest of circumstances. Most void whales spend their entire existence in complete isolation, drifting alone through the void, separated from any other member of their species by distances measured in light years. For creatures of such size and complexity, this loneliness takes on a quality beyond anything a human mind can properly conceive. Imagine living your entire life without ever seeing another being like yourself, without any form of communication or contact with your own kind, wandering endlessly through darkness so complete that even light itself seems a rare and precious commodity. On very rare occasions, multiple void whales have been observed traveling together, though whether this constitutes a true pod or simply the coincidental overlapping of migration routes remains unknown. Orc encounters with groups of void whales, which they cheerfully refer to as fishies, suggest that at least some void whales do travel in groups. But even these groupings seem temporary at best, loose assemblages that might persist for a time before the individual creatures drift apart once more, each returning to its solitary journey through the stars. The purpose of these temporary gatherings, if they serve any purpose at all beyond coincidence, is unknown. Perhaps they are mating events, though the reproductive cycle of void whales is so poorly understood that this is purely speculation. Perhaps they are feeding opportunities at particularly rich, stellar phenomena. Or perhaps even void whales, incomprehensible as they are, sometimes feel the pull of something like loneliness. The migration patterns of void whales, such as they are understood, seem to follow routes between stellar phenomena rather than inhabitable worlds. They move from star to star, from nebula to nebula, following paths through the void that might be determined by gravity wells, by concentrations of particular types of radiation, or by factors entirely unknown to observers. Some migration routes seem to follow the galactic arms, while others cut across the emptiness between them, the void whales drifting through the trackless dark for years, or even decades between, feeding opportunities. During these long transits, the creatures seem to enter a sort of torpor, their biological processes slowing to a barely detectable level, their movements becoming even more languid and dreamlike than usual. What void whales think, if they think at all, remains completely unknowable. Their brains are massive, complex organs that generate detectable psychic emanations, suggesting some form of consciousness, or at least sentience. But attempts to communicate with void whales through psychic means have universally failed. Either the creatures lack the capacity for communication, their minds operating on principles too alien for even the most powerful psychers to comprehend, or they simply have nothing to say to the tiny, ephemeral beings that sometimes cross their path. Psychers who have attempted to read the minds of void whales report experiencing overwhelming sensations of vast, cold emptiness, of thoughts like slow currents moving through an ocean of consciousness, of awareness spread so thin across such enormous scale that picking out individual thoughts becomes impossible. The lifespan of a void whale is another great unknown. Without defined breeding cycles, without clear markers of age, without any way to track individual creatures across the centuries, estimating how long these beings live is nearly impossible. Some researchers believe void whales might be functionally immortal, capable of surviving indefinitely, barring death by violence or accident. Others suggest that their biology eventually fails after some immense span of years, that even these titans eventually succumb to the slow decay of entropy. The radioactive nature of their tissues might provide a clue, as the accumulation of radioactive isotopes could eventually reach levels that damage even the void whale's exotic biology. But without long-term observations spanning centuries or millennia, this remains pure speculation. What is certain is that void whales exist in a state of constant, grinding hardship. Every moment of their existence requires them to survive in an environment that is fundamentally hostile to life. The vacuum of space, the lethal radiation of stars, the cosmic rays that sleeth through the galaxy, the gravitational stresses of their immense size, All of these factors constantly work to destroy them. They cannot rest in any meaningful sense, cannot retreat to safety or find shelter from the universe's attempts to kill them. They must keep moving, keep feeding, keep generating the psychic fields that protect their minds from the predatory entities of the warp, all while knowing that they are among the largest and most visible targets in the entire galaxy. Every other major faction sees them as either prey to be hunted or resources to be harvested. They have no allies, no protectors, no safe havens anywhere in the entirety of known space. This is the daily reality of void whale existence: to be utterly alone, utterly vulnerable despite their size, and utterly without purpose beyond the simple imperative to survive another day in a galaxy that wants nothing more than to see them die. Living ecosystems, unwilling hosts. Perhaps no aspect of void whale existence better exemplifies the grinding cruelty of their lives than the fact that their own bodies betray them, serving as habitats for entire ecosystems of parasitic horrors that treat these massive creatures as nothing more than real estate to be colonized. The void whales do not choose to host these ecosystems. They gain no benefit from the myriad creatures that burrow through their flesh, nest in their organs, and feed on their tissues. Instead, they must simply endure the constant presence of unwanted passengers, an infestation so thorough and so widespread that it becomes part of what defines them, a permanent condition of their existence from which there is no escape. The internal anatomy of a void whale provides ample opportunity for parasitic colonization. Their bodies, as previously discussed, contain dimensional pockets and impossible spaces where conventional geometry does not apply. These areas become perfect breeding grounds and habitats for creatures that are themselves products of the warp, entities that can exist in spaces where reality's rules are more suggestion than law. Over time, as a void whale ages and travels repeatedly between real space and the warp, these internal spaces become increasingly contaminated with parasitic life. What begins as a few scattered organisms eventually grows into a complete ecosystem, a horrifying microcosm of life thriving within the unknowing host. The most well-documented of these parasitic species are the remora, bipedal vampiric creatures that represent something nightmarishly perfect in their adaptation to void whale parasitism. The remora are not the small, harmless fish that ancient Terran oceans once knew. These are hideous, piscine bipeds, walking on two legs, while their bodies retain disturbing fish-like qualities. Their most prominent feature is their mouths, sucker-like organs lined with needle-thin teeth designed for one purpose: to latch onto flesh and drain blood. The remora are warp entities, native to the Imperium, and they colonize void whales in numbers that can reach into the millions or even billions within a single host. The remora establish themselves in what witnesses have described as frond forests within the void whale's body, bizarre organic structures that grow in the creature's internal cavities, creating what almost resembles vegetation, but is actually some form of fleshy growth, possibly produced by the void whale's own tissue in response to the parasitic infection. Within these frond forests, remora build their societies, if the term can be applied to such creatures. They hunt through the gill chasms, the vast respiratory structures within the void whale, ambushing any other organisms that wander into their territory. They breed in the darkness of their host's interior, producing generation after generation of vampiric offspring, none of whom will ever see the outside of their living prison. The remora feed not only on their host, but on each other and on any other organisms unfortunate enough to inhabit the same void whale. They are voracious predators, their hunger never truly satisfied, their populations kept in check only by the limited resources available within even so massive a host. When the void whale dies, the remora die with it, unable to survive outside their host's body, utterly dependent on the creature they parasitize. There is something profoundly grim in this codependency, this relationship where neither party benefits, where the parasite cannot exist without the host, but provides nothing in return except suffering. The first major documented encounter with remora occurred in 877 M41, when the Space Wolves chapter, led by the legendary wolf lord Engir Krakendoom, engaged a hideously mutated void whale that had emerged from the warp near the astral stronghold of Perilia. This incident, which we will examine in greater detail later, revealed the true horror of Remora infestation. The Space Wolves, legendary warriors who had faced demons, xenos, and every manner of horror the galaxy could produce, found themselves unprepared for what they discovered within the void whale's body. Thousands upon thousands of Remora swarmed through the creature's internal spaces, attacking the space marines with mindless ferocity, their needle teeth unable to penetrate ceramite power armor, but creating such a mass of bodies that the Astartes could barely move. Alongside the Remora exist other parasitic species, though they are less well documented. The Kruvar are described as worm-like creatures that inhabit void whale corpses, though whether they colonize living hosts or only move in after death remains unclear. Mechanicus records from the Leagues of Votan suggests that Kruvar can cause structural instabilities in void whale carcasses being used as mining sites, occasionally emerging to attack workers before kin forces can eliminate them. This suggests that Kruvar are substantial in size, potentially dozens of meters long, capable of burrowing through the dense tissues of a void whale with disturbing ease. Beyond these named species, countless other organisms are believed to inhabit void whales. Some reports speak of creatures as large as shuttles, massive parasites that make their homes in the dimensional pockets within void whale flesh. Others describe swarms of smaller entities, like insects, but sized to match the scale of their host, filling entire chambers within the creature's body. Psychic emanations detected from within some void whales suggest the presence of warp entities that have become permanently resident within the host, neither fully demonic nor entirely material, existing in a liminal state between dimensions. The burden this places on the void whale cannot be overstated. Imagine carrying within your own body an entire ecosystem of creatures whose only relationship to you is predatory or parasitic. Every movement you make disturbs thousands or millions of organisms living in your flesh. Every moment of your existence, you can feel them burrowing through your tissues, feeding on your blood, reproducing in your organs. You cannot remove them. You cannot escape them. You cannot even rest, because they are always there, always present, an infestation you carry with you everywhere you go, across light years and through the warp itself. Worse still, these ecosystems serve as a danger to anyone who approaches a void whale with hostile intent. The parasites defend their territory with the same ferocity they display in their internal struggles for dominance. When the Space Wolves boarded the mutated void whale near Perilia, they expected to fight the creature itself. Instead, they found themselves waging war against the Remora, a battle that claimed significant casualties and forced the Astartes to fight through miles of hostile flesh, while under constant attack from enemies that knew every twist and turn of their living fortress. Any force attempting to kill a void whale from within, to place charges in its vital organs, or sabotage its biological systems, must first survive the ecosystem that has made the creature its home. Some parasites actively harm their host, even beyond simple feeding. The Remora's constant bloodletting must create a significant drain on the void whale's resources. The Kruvar's burrowing creates wounds and channels through flesh that can become infected or develop into more serious problems. The presence of warp entities within the dimensional pockets might corrupt the surrounding tissues, spreading warp taint through the host's body over time. Each of these factors contributes to a slow degradation of the void whale's health, a gradual weakening that makes it more vulnerable to predators and external threats. There is no evidence that void whales can resist or prevent these infestations. Unlike many organisms that have evolved immune systems to fight parasites, void whales seem helpless against the creatures that colonize them. Perhaps their immune systems, if they possess such things, cannot distinguish between their own impossibly complex tissues. and the foreign organisms that inhabit them. Perhaps the creatures that parasitize void whales are themselves so tied to warp energy and psychic emanations that normal biological defenses cannot recognize them as threats. Or perhaps void whales simply lack any means of fighting back, their evolution or creation having left them vulnerable to this particular form of exploitation. The result is a life sentence of invasion and occupation. Every void whale old enough to have traveled through the warp multiple times likely carries within itself an entire hidden world of parasitic life. The creature swims through space, magnificent and terrible in its scale, while within its flesh, uncounted organisms wage their own wars, hunt their own prey, and build their own societies, all oblivious to the fact that their entire universe is the body of a single, slowly dying titan. And the void whale itself, whether aware of this burden or not, has no choice but to continue its journey, carrying its unwanted passengers into whatever future awaits it. The hunters, orcs and their fishies. Of all the countless horrors and hardships that define a void whale's existence, perhaps none are as persistent and peculiar as the attention they receive from the orcs. These green-skinned fungal warriors, the galaxy's most numerous and violent species, have developed an unusual fascination with void whales, hunting them with a fervor that makes little practical sense, even by orc standards. The orcs call them fishies, a term that carries surprising affection given the brutal nature of orc-void whale interactions. To understand why orcs hunt void whales despite gaining no apparent benefit from doing so reveals something profound about both species and about the senseless cruelty that often defines life in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. The orc relationship with void whales begins with the simple fact that greenskins see everything in the galaxy as existing in one of three categories: things to fight, things to loot, and things to ignore because they're too boring. Void whales, by their sheer size and the challenge they represent, firmly fall into the first category. When an orc fleet encounters a void whale drifting through space, the reaction is immediate and predictable. Klaxons sound, weapons are loaded. Orcs begin shouting battle cries and fighting among themselves for the honor of being first into combat. The void whale, blissfully unaware or simply uncaring, continues its migration while the orcs prepare to attack. What makes orc void whale hunting particularly grim is its essential pointlessness. As established earlier, void whale flesh is naturally radioactive, poisonous even to orcs, whose biology allows them to survive almost any toxin or contamination. An orc who eats void whale meat will suffer severe radiation poisoning, a painful death even by greenskin standards. The Mechanicus has conducted extensive analysis of void whale tissues and confirmed that no known species save the Tyranids can safely consume this flesh. The orcs know this. They have lost countless boys to radiation sickness after successful hunts. And yet, they continue to hunt void whales with undiminished enthusiasm. The reason, according to orc cultural experts within the Ordo Xenos and fragments of intercepted orc communications, is that orcs hunt void whales not for food, but for bait. The radioactive, poison-laden innards of a void whale, what orcs cheerfully call scrobble, make excellent attractant for even larger and more dangerous creatures. Orcs use harvested void, whale organs and flesh to lure out void kraken, space-dwelling predators even more massive and deadly than void whales themselves. The kraken, apparently immune to or attracted by the radioactive properties of void whale tissue, follow the scent trail of scrobble to orc hunting parties, where the greenskins engage them in battles of truly epic scale. This creates a horrifying cycle of exploitation. Void whales die so that orcs can harvest bait. That bait attracts void kraken. Orcs fight and kill void kraken for sport and glory. And somewhere in this process, more void whales inevitably cross paths with orc fleets, and the entire cycle begins again. The void whale serves as an unwitting participant in its own destruction, its body becoming a commodity in hunting practices that have nothing to do with its existence and everything to do with orc cultural imperatives regarding violence and competition. Orc hunting techniques vary widely, depending on the clan, war boss, and available resources. Some orc fleets simply open fire with every weapon they possess, filling space with such a volume of dakka that even a void whale's massive bulk cannot escape unscathed. These hunts are brutally straightforward, relying on overwhelming firepower to literally blast the creature apart. The void whale, lacking any meaningful ability to fight back, simply endures the barrage until catastrophic damage to vital systems causes death. Its body, shredded by countless shells, missiles, and energy weapons, becomes a debris field that orcs then harvest for scrobble. Other hunting methods involve boarding actions, with orcs using boarding torpedoes to penetrate the void whale's hide and fight their way into its interior. These hunts more closely resemble the space wolves encounter with the mutated void whale near Perilia, with greenskins battling through the creature's internal ecosystems, fighting remora and other parasites while searching for particularly choice organs to harvest. Orc boarding actions have the advantage, from the hunter's perspective, of being more exciting than simple bombardment. They allow for proper fighting, for hand-to-hand combat, and the kind of close-quarters brutality that orcs find most satisfying. Some particularly creative or insane orc mechboys have developed specialized harpoon weapons designed to penetrate void whale hide and inject explosive charges deep into the creature's body. These weapons, often called whale stickers in orc parlance, allow hunters to cripple or kill void whales from a distance while conserving ammunition for other prey. The sight of a void whale drifting through space with dozens of harpoons embedded in its flesh, each trailing a cord back to an orc hunting vessel, creates an image of profound cruelty, the massive creature reduced to a pincushion for greenskin entertainment. Among the most famous orc void whale hunters is Captain Badruk, the most notorious freebooter in recent galactic history. Badruk, who leads a band of Flashgit's mercenaries aboard his kill cruiser, Da Blacktooth, has supposedly achieved what many consider impossible: the single-handed killing of a void whale. The accounts vary, as orc tales often do, with some claiming Badruk personally brought down the creature with nothing but his customized snaz gun and several inebriated snotlings. More realistic assessments suggest he coordinated a complex hunting operation involving multiple ships and precision strikes against the void whale's vital systems, though even this more conservative version still represents a feat of considerable skill and daring. Whether or not Badruk truly killed a void whale alone, the claim itself speaks to the prestige such hunts carry within orc society. Among Flashgits, who pride themselves on accumulating wealth and achieving impossible feats of marksmanship, claiming to have killed a void whale single-handedly represents the ultimate boast. Badruk's reputation has only grown since this supposed kill, with other orc war bosses seeking his services, specifically because of his demonstrated ability to bring down the biggest, most impossible targets. The void whale he supposedly killed might never have known it was being hunted until the moment weapons fire began tearing through its flesh, its death serving primarily to enhance one orc's reputation among his peers. The orc practice of hunting void whales has led to numerous encounters between greenskin fleets and other factions also interested in these creatures. Imperial Navy vessels have arrived at void whale carcasses to find orc scavengers already at work, leading to battles over salvage rights to a creature neither side actually needs. Leagues of Votan mining operations on void whale corpses have been disrupted by orc raiders seeking scrobble, forcing the kin to defend their claims with force. Tyrannid hive fleets, drawn by the biomass represented by void whale bodies, clash with orc hunters in zero gravity. Conflicts of truly spectacular violence. From the void whale's perspective, if it possesses enough awareness to have a perspective, the orc threat represents a constant, unpredictable danger. A void whale has no way to distinguish an orc fleet from any other stellar phenomenon. It cannot recognize the threat until weapons are already firing. It cannot communicate or negotiate. It cannot surrender or plead for mercy. All it can do is try to escape, using whatever speed its massive form can generate, fleeing through space, while orc vessels pursue like packs of predators chasing wounded prey. Some void whales survive these encounters, though survival often means escaping with horrific wounds, great rents in their hide, leaking atmosphere, and fluids into the void. These injured creatures must somehow heal while continuing to navigate, feed, and avoid other threats, all while dealing with injuries that would kill any smaller organism outright. The regenerative capabilities of void whales, if they exist, have never been properly studied, but the fact that void whales with obvious old wounds have been observed suggests at least some capacity for recovery. But recovery does not erase the trauma, and a void whale that has survived one orc attack remains just as vulnerable to the next. The orc hunting of void whales serves no conservation purpose, follows no sustainable practices, and shows no consideration for the long-term survival of the species. If orcs are capable of driving void whales to extinction, they show no inclination to prevent this outcome. Each hunt is its own isolated event, motivated by immediate desires for violence, glory, and bait, rather than any longer-term considerations. The void whale population, whatever it might be, receives no protection, no management, no consideration whatsoever beyond its utility as target practice and scrobble supplier. And so void whales swim on, massive and vulnerable, while orc fleets roam the stars, looking for fishies to hunt. The greenskins laugh and boast and prepare their weapons, eager for the next encounter. The void whales, unaware of their status as game animals in a hunt they never consented to, continue their lonely migrations, existing in blissful ignorance until the moment orc weapons begin tearing through their flesh. It is a relationship defined entirely by predation, exploitation, and casual cruelty, with no redemptive qualities whatsoever, which makes it perfectly suited to the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. Predators of the void, the orcs, despite their enthusiasm and frequency, are far from the only predators that threaten void whales. The cold vacuum between stars teems with horrors both material and immaterial, creatures that view void whales as prey, food, or obstacles to be eliminated. Each of these predatory relationships carries its own particular brand of horror, its own mechanisms of suffering, and its own contribution to making void whale existence a continuous struggle for survival against overwhelming odds. The tyranids represent perhaps the most terrifying threat to void whales, not because of their hunting methods, but because of what their attention means. The tyranids are an extragalactic horror, a species or collection of species organized into hive fleets that exist for one purpose: to consume all biomass in the galaxy. They are the galaxy's appetite made manifest, an endless hunger that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be stopped, and shows no mercy or hesitation. When Tyranid bioships detect a void whale, they see nothing but calories, a massive concentration of biological matter ripe for consumption. Unlike orcs, who kill void whales for sport or bait, Tyranids kill to feed. Every gram of void whale flesh, despite its radioactive properties, can be processed by Tyranid digestion pools and converted into new bioforms. The Tyranids' hyper-adaptive biology allows them to consume literally anything organic, breaking down even the most toxic substances into usable nutrients. Radioactive void whale tissues pose no challenge whatsoever to organisms that can digest weapons-grade toxins and extract nutrition from substances that would kill any other life form instantly. The process of Tyranid consumption is methodical and horrifying. Bioships surround the void whale, cutting off any escape routes. Boarding organisms, creatures designed specifically for penetrating and pacifying large prey, attach themselves to the whale's exterior and begin tunneling inward. Once they reach the interior spaces, they release paralytic toxins, digestive enzymes, and worse, into the void whale's systems. The creature, still alive but increasingly unable to function, becomes a living feeding ground as tyrannid organisms begin consuming it from the inside out. The tyrannids waste nothing. Every organ, every bone, every drop of fluid within the void whale's body gets harvested and processed. Even the parasitic remora and other organisms living within the void whale become food for the swarm. The entire ecosystem that the void whale has unwillingly hosted throughout its life gets consumed along with the host itself. When the tyrannids finish, nothing remains but empty space where a living titan once drifted. The void whale's entire existence, potentially spanning centuries, ends as nothing more than a meal for an endless, mindless hunger. What makes tyrannid predation particularly grim is its inevitability. Tyrannid hive fleets are drawn to concentrations of biomass by instincts and sensory capabilities that span light years. A void whale cannot hide from them, cannot outrun them once detected, cannot fight them in any meaningful way. The tyrannids will hunt it down with patient, inexorable efficiency, treating it not as an enemy to be defeated, but as food to be processed. There is no glory in this death, no great battle, no heroic last stand. Just consumption, reduction, the transformation of a vast and complex being into raw materials for the hive fleet's endless war against all life. Beyond the tyrannids lurk creatures even more mysterious and threatening. Void kraken, mentioned earlier in the context of orc hunting practices, represent apex predators of the deepest space. These entities, poorly documented and rarely observed, are said to be larger even than void whales, inhabiting the darkness between star systems, where no ships travel and no light reaches. Void kraken are not simply big fish, they are predatory nightmares, creatures whose very existence challenges understanding, capable of attacking and destroying even capital ships with contemptuous ease. The relationship between void kraken and void whales remains largely speculative, built on fragments of evidence and rare observations. Some xenobiologists theorize that void whales might actually be prey species for void kraken, that the natural predator-prey relationship these creatures share explains why void whales produce such massive amounts of biomass and why void kraken seem drawn to void whale remains. If this theory holds, then void whales exist at a specific ecological niche, large enough to feed void kraken, but not large enough to defend themselves effectively against these ultimate predators. Encounters between void whales and void kraken have been reported by various sources, though the reliability of these reports varies wildly. Ship crews claim to have witnessed void kraken attacks on void whales, describing scenes of unimaginable violence as the kraken's tentacles or appendages wrapped around the whale's body, crushing and tearing while the victim thrashed in futile desperation. Other reports speak of void whales fleeing at speeds they shouldn't be capable of when kraken appeared, suggesting that on some level, void whales can detect and fear these predators. If void kraken truly prey on void whales, it creates another layer of grim irony to their existence. The void whale, already burdened with parasites, hunted by multiple galactic powers, and struggling to survive in the hostile void, must also contend with creatures specifically evolved or adapted to hunt and kill them. No matter how far they travel, no matter how empty the space they traverse, there exists somewhere in the darkness a predator capable of ending their existence with brutal efficiency. Human forces also pose a threat to void whales, though their motivations vary more widely than other predators. Imperial Navy vessels sometimes attack void whales simply because they represent navigational hazards, massive objects drifting through space lanes that could damage or destroy ships that fail to detect them in time. These attacks are not hunts so much as pest control, efforts to clear space of obstacles that might endanger valuable vessels or cargo. Rogue traders and other independent human operators sometimes hunt void whales for profit. Even though the flesh is inedible, Other components and materials harvested from void whale corpses can fetch substantial prices on black and grey markets. Bones can be processed into exotic materials. Organs containing concentrated warp energies might be valuable to certain factions. The psychic skin mentioned earlier, capable of generating Jella field-like protection, commands astronomical prices from anyone seeking to construct warp-capable vessels without relying on conventional technology. Chaos forces occasionally kill void whales for reasons having nothing to do with practical gain. Chaos warbands might destroy a void whale simply because they can, because the act of killing something so massive satisfies whatever dark urges drive them. Chaos-corrupted psychers might harvest void whale components for use in dark rituals, using the creature's natural psychic abilities as ingredients in blasphemous ceremonies. The actual death of the void whale matters less to these forces than what they can extract from its corpse, or the suffering they can cause in the process of killing it. Even seemingly benign factions pose threats. The Leagues of Votan, despite being human offshoots rather than Xenos, treat void whales purely as resources to be exploited. Their mining operations on void whale corpses can last for years. Entire kin clan holds, establishing semi-permanent installations on and within the massive bodies, extracting every valuable material they can identify. While this doesn't directly threaten living void whales, it creates a market for void whale materials, incentivizing others to hunt and kill these creatures to supply that market. What all these predators share is a fundamental view of void whales as things rather than beings, objects to be used rather than creatures with any intrinsic right to exist. Whether the motivation is hunger, profit, safety, or simple malice, the end result is the same. Void whales die, alone and far from anything that might mourn their passing, their bodies harvested or consumed or left to drift as lifeless debris. They have no defenders, no protectors, no faction that considers their welfare worth preserving. They exist at the mercy of a galaxy that shows no mercy to anything. The void whale's life becomes a constant calculation of escape and evasion, if their minds work in such terms. They must feed, but feeding makes them visible. They must migrate, but migration routes cross territories claimed by predators. They must rest, but resting means vulnerability. Every choice, every action, every moment carries the risk of detection by something that sees them as prey. And unlike evolved prey species that develop defenses, camouflage, or behaviors to minimize predation, void whales seem almost defenseless. Their only protection, their size, which paradoxically makes them more visible and more vulnerable to the kind of massive forces capable of bringing them down. Corruption and plague. The Nurgle touched. If the natural predators and parasites that plague void whales represent the physical horrors of their existence, then corruption by chaos represents a spiritual and existential degradation beyond even these grim baselines. The transformation of a void whale into a servant of chaos, particularly of Nurgle, the plague god, creates something far worse than a simple predator or parasite relationship. It creates an abomination, a weapon of biological warfare on a scale almost impossible to comprehend, and it does so by corrupting the very nature of a creature that was already suffering. The most significant documented case of void whale corruption occurred when 7 void whales, through circumstances that remain unclear, wandered into the Garden of Nurgle itself. The Garden of Nurgle is not a physical location in any conventional sense, but rather a domain within the warp, a realm of the plague god where diseases breed and evolve, where rot and decay are celebrated as the highest forms of life. How 7 void whales ended up in this nightmare realm is unknown. Perhaps they were navigating warp currents and became caught in the garden's gravitational pull. Perhaps they were deliberately lured or driven there by Nurgle's servants. Or perhaps, in the strange logic of the warp, they simply appeared there through no will of their own, victims of the Imperium's capricious nature. Once within Nurgle's garden, the void whales became subject to the plague god's tender mercies. Nurgle's affection, such as it is, takes the form of diseases beyond counting, each crafted with malevolent creativity to maximize suffering while preventing death. The garden itself is a laboratory of pestilence, where new plagues are born from the decomposing dreams of dying things, where every surface crawls with infection, and where the very air is thick with spores and microorganisms that seek to colonize any living tissue they encounter. The 7 void whales, already massive and strange, became something far worse through their exposure to Nurgle's domain. Their humble bodies, once merely radioactive and hostile to conventional life, became vectors for diseases that exist nowhere in nature. Plagues crafted by a god whose understanding of biology is matched only by his desire to spread suffering. Their flesh rotted even as it lived, turning colors that hurt to look upon, developing textures that inspired revulsion in any who witnessed them. Their internal parasites, the remora and cruevar and countless other organisms, became corrupted as well, transforming into things even more vile than their original forms. These corrupted void whales retained their ability to navigate between warp and real space, but now they carried with them fragments of Nurgle's garden wherever they went. When they manifested in the Imperium, they brought with them clouds of toxic miasma, swarms of plague flies, and concentrations of diseases so virulent that even sealed void suits and hermetic systems offered only temporary protection. They had become mobile plague vectors, living planets of infection drifting through space, spreading Nurgle's gifts to any world unfortunate enough to cross their path. During the Plague Wars, Mortarion, the demon primarch of the Death Guard, and Nurgle's most favored son, utilized these corrupted void whales as weapons against the realm of Ultramar. The plan was as brilliant as it was horrifying. Rather than fight a conventional space battle, Mortarion would deploy the plague-ridden void whales to the worlds he wished to corrupt, crashing their massive bodies into planetary surfaces and releasing the accumulated filth of Nurgle's garden directly into the biosphere. The primary target was Eax, once a beautiful garden world and jewel of Ultramar, renowned throughout the Imperium for its pristine ecology and peaceful beauty. The descriptions of what happened when the corrupted void whales crashed into Ajax are among the most disturbing passages in the entire Dark Imperium trilogy, written by Guy Haley with a level of detail that brings the horror viscerally to life. The void whales, bloated with corruption, their bodies swollen to bursting with accumulated filth and disease, descended through Ajax's atmosphere like meteorites of flesh and pestilence. The impacts were apocalyptic. Each void whale struck with the force of continent-killing asteroids, creating craters measured in hundreds of kilometers. But unlike conventional asteroid strikes, these impacts did not simply release kinetic energy. They released the contents of the void whales' bodies, thousands of cubic kilometers of plague-ridden tissue, organs bursting with concentrated disease, and entire ecosystems of corrupted parasites. The remora within the whales, mutated beyond recognition, spilled out across Ajax's surface by the millions, spreading across the landscape like a living carpet of teeth and sucker mouths. The diseases released by this biological bombardment defied any natural classification. Nurgle's plagues are not bound by conventional rules of infection or transmission. They spread through will and malice as much as through physical contact. Within hours of the void whale impacts, Ajax's beautiful forests began to rot, their trees collapsing into mulch, even as new, horrifying growths sprouted from the infected soil. The planet's water sources turned into stagnant pools of filth. The very air became thick with spores and microorganisms that transformed living tissue into suppurating horror. The transformation of Ajax demonstrated the ultimate perversion of the void whale's existence. These creatures, which had never chosen to serve any power, which had simply existed in their lonely wandering through space, had been turned into weapons of mass destruction on a planetary scale. Their bodies, which had once represented nothing more than massive concentrations of biomass, became delivery systems for apocalyptic plagues. Even in death, even as their corpses rotted on Eax's surface, they continued to serve Nurgle's purposes, their decaying tissues providing breeding grounds for ever more virulent diseases. The Imperial forces attempting to reclaim Eax found themselves fighting not just against Deathguard and demons, but against the landscape itself, every surface contaminated by the residue of void whale corruption. Space Marines in sealed power armor reported feeling the corruption pressing against their armor's seals, seeking any microscopic gap through which to infiltrate. Ordinary human soldiers lasted mere minutes in the open before succumbing to infections that liquefied their organs or transformed them into plague zombies. The 7 void whales' transformation into plague weapons represents perhaps the ultimate expression of their grim existence. They had no choice in their corruption. They gained nothing from it. They simply became tools, their natural biology weaponized by forces that cared nothing for their actual existence beyond their utility as plague carriers. Even, their deaths served purposes other than their own, their corpses continuing to spread infection long after consciousness, if they possessed any, had fled. But the corruption of void whales is not limited to these 7 documented cases. Throughout the galaxy, other void whales have almost certainly encountered warp phenomena, chaos forces, or concentrated areas of corruption. Each such encounter risks transforming another void whale into a vector for chaos, creating new horrors that might spread across the galaxy for centuries before being detected and destroyed. The void whale's natural ability to navigate the warp, once a survival adaptation, becomes a vulnerability when that same warp is home to powers that view corruption as the highest form of creation. The Battle of Perilia, Engir Krakendoom's hunt. Among all documented encounters between void whales and the forces of the Imperium, none has been as thoroughly recorded or as viscerally described as the battle that took place near the astral stronghold of Perilia in 877 M41. This engagement, led by Wolf Lord Engir Krakendoom of the Space Wolves chapter, provides our most detailed understanding of what it means to fight a void whale from within, to navigate its impossible internal geography while under assault from the creatures that call it home. The void whale that emerged from the warp gate of Sloth near Perilia was not a typical specimen, if any void whale can be called typical. This creature had spent too long in the warp, swimming through the Imperium's unnatural tides until the boundary between its physical form and its spiritual essence had begun to blur and break down. When it manifested in real space, it carried with it the marks of profound mutation, its body twisted by warp energies into something that defied easy classification. At first, even experienced xenobiologists attached to the Imperium's forces could not identify what they were seeing. The thing that had appeared near Perilia was 12,000 miles of heaving, twisted flesh, a mass so enormous that it registered on sensors as an asteroid or small moon. Only after careful analysis did a female xenobiologist realize what they faced. A void whale, but one transformed by warp exposure into something far more terrifying than its natural form. The corrupted void whale appeared to be on a direct course for Perilia's astral stronghold, whether by design, accident, or some form of rudimentary predatory instinct impossible to determine. Its massive bulk, if allowed to collide with the stronghold, would destroy it absolutely, killing thousands and eliminating a strategic Imperial position. The decision to destroy the void whale was made immediately, but the question of how to accomplish this destruction proved more complex. Conventional weapons fire, while capable of damaging the creature, could not guarantee a kill before it reached Perilia. The void whale's enormous size meant that even catastrophic damage to parts of its body might not stop its momentum or kill it before it crashed into the stronghold. Furthermore, Destroying it with external bombardment would create a massive debris field that could still threaten Perilia, tons of corrupted flesh and bone scattering through space like shrapnel from some impossibly vast grenade. The Space Wolves, under Engir Krakendoom's command, proposed a different solution. They would board the Void Whale using drill-tipped boarding torpedoes, fight their way to its vital organs, plant thermal charges directly in its heart or equivalent systems, and destroy it from within. The plan had merit in its directness and in the fact that it would reduce the debris field by vaporizing the creature's core before its body could impact Perilia. But it also carried enormous risks that would become apparent only after the Space Wolves had committed to the assault. The boarding torpedoes, designed to penetrate the hulls of enemy warships, punched through the Void Whale's hide with relative ease. The creature's skin, while thick and resilient, could not withstand weapons designed to pierce meters of adamantium and ceramite plating. The Space Wolves deployed directly into the Void Whale's body, their suits sealing against the vacuum as they entered spaces that should not have existed within any living creature. What they found within defied their expectations completely. The Space Wolves had prepared for a straightforward mission: navigate to the heart, plant charges, escape. Instead, they discovered that the Void Whale's interior was a maze of impossible architecture, spaces that seemed to shift and change as they moved through them, dimensions that folded in on themselves in ways that hurt to perceive. This was not simple biological structure. This was geography, warped by warp exposure. The Void Whale's tissues transformed into a labyrinth that existed partially in real space and partially in the Imperium. And within this labyrinth waited the remora. The Space Wolves encountered their first remora within minutes of penetrating the Void Whale's hide. The creatures appeared from side passages and hidden chambers, their bipedal forms moving with disturbing speed, their sucker mouths opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. The remora threw themselves at the Space Marines with mindless ferocity, attacking in waves that threatened to overwhelm through sheer numbers. Power armor saved the Space Wolves from immediate destruction. The remora's teeth, while capable of draining blood from unprotected flesh, could not penetrate ceramite plating. But the creatures compensated for this limitation through tactics that suggested a level of intelligence beyond simple animals. They swarmed, coating Space Marines in layers of bodies until the weight of accumulated remora threatened to immobilize them. They struck at joints and seals, seeking weak points in the armor. They used the environment to their advantage, attacking from unexpected angles in the labyrinthine passages. Engir Krakendoom's records describe the battle as unlike anything the Space Wolves had previously experienced. They were accustomed to fighting in ship corridors, on planetary surfaces, in environments where space and direction made sense. Here, within the Void Whale, gravity seemed to shift without warning. Passages that appeared to lead forward sometimes curved back on themselves. The frond forests that remora nested in were not vegetation, but fleshy protrusions from the Void Whale's own tissues, structures that moved and shifted as though alive, which they were, being part of the host's body. The Space Wolves adapted, as Space Marines always do, but adaptation came at a cost. They fought through miles of corrupted flesh, through gill chasms where respiratory tissues larger than hab blocks pulsed and contracted, through chambers filled with fluids that their suits barely protected against. The remora never stopped coming, waves of them emerging from the darkness, their numbers suggesting populations in the millions or tens of millions. The thermal charges were eventually placed deep within what Engir identified as the Void Whale's primary circulatory system, organs that pumped fluids through vessels kilometers wide. The Space Wolves fought their way back toward their boarding torpedoes, racing against time and the remora hordes that pursued them. The escape was harrowing, several Space Marines being dragged down by sheer weight of numbers. Their gene seed recovered only after brutal close-quarters combat cleared the remora from their bodies. The thermal charges detonated simultaneously, releasing heat sufficient to vaporize everything within a radius measured in kilometers. The void whale's vital organs boiled away, its circulatory system ruptured catastrophically, its massive body experiencing what amounted to instant death. The creature's momentum carried it forward for a time, even after brain death, but the destruction of its internal structure meant that by the time it would have reached Perilia, it was already nothing more than a corpse. The debris field created by the void, whale's death became known as the Perilian gas belt, a region of space containing the scattered remains of the creature mixed with superheated gases from the thermal detonations. The belt serves as a memorial to the engagement, a permanent reminder of the battle between space wolves and void whale, though few who see it understand what it represents. What makes this encounter particularly significant is what it revealed about void whale biology and the ecosystems they host. The space wolves' detailed reports provided xenobiologists with unprecedented information about void whale internal structure, the types and behaviors of parasitic organisms that inhabit them, and the difficulties involved in combat within their bodies. This information has proven valuable for later encounters with void whales, allowing Imperial forces to better understand what they face when confronting these creatures. But the Battle of Perilia also highlighted the fundamental tragedy of void whale existence. This creature had not chosen to threaten Perilia. It had not deliberately swum toward the stronghold with malicious intent. It was simply moving, migrating, following whatever instincts or imperatives drove it, unaware that its path would bring it into conflict with forces capable of destroying it. The void whale died because it was in the wrong place, because its existence represented a threat to Imperial interests, because there was no way to communicate with it or redirect its course. The remora that died alongside their host perished for equally pointless reasons. They were simply defending their territory, attacking what they perceived as invaders in the only home they knew. When the thermal charges detonated, millions or billions of remora died instantly. Their entire civilization, such as it was, exterminated in moments. Neither the void whale nor its parasites had any choice in their fates. They simply existed, and that existence brought them into conflict with forces that saw them as obstacles to be eliminated. Exploitation. The living die, the dead serve. The death of a void whale does not end its usefulness to the various factions that inhabit the galaxy. If anything, death transforms the void whale from a mobile target into a stationary resource, a mine of exotic materials waiting to be harvested by anyone with the means and motivation to exploit it. The corpse of a void whale represents such a massive concentration of rare and valuable substances that multiple factions have developed entire industries around locating, claiming, and processing these enormous carcasses. This post-mortem exploitation adds yet another grim dimension to void whale existence. Even in death, they serve the needs of others. The Leagues of Votan have become perhaps the most sophisticated harvesters of void whale corpses in the known galaxy. These long-separated offshoots of humanity, dwelling in the galactic core, possess technology and knowledge that allows them to locate and process void whale remains with remarkable efficiency. When a void whale dies within territories claimed or monitored by the kin, Votan mining fleets mobilize within days, converging on the corpse before other scavengers can claim it. The scale of Votan mining operations on void whale corpses defies easy comprehension. These are not simple salvage missions that last a few weeks or months. A single void whale carcass can support multi-year mining operations, entire kin clanholds, establishing semi-permanent installations on and within the massive body. The corpse becomes a city, with processing facilities, habitation modules, warehouses, and defensive installations covering its surface like barnacles on the hull of an ancient ship. The kin begin by conducting comprehensive surveys of the corpse, using advanced sensors to map its internal structure and identify concentrations of valuable materials. They catalogue every organ, every bone, every unusual tissue formation, prioritizing extraction based on value and accessibility. The most prized material is the psychic skin, the complex mesh of nervous tissue that void whales use to generate their warp protection. This skin must be harvested carefully, removed in large sections while preserving the intricate neural connections that give it its unique properties. The process of harvesting psychic skin requires specialists trained in techniques that blend xenobiology, psychic manipulation, and careful precision cutting. Harvesters work in teams, using tools that can slice through void whale hide without damaging the underlying neural mesh. Each section of harvested skin, sometimes measuring kilometers across, must be preserved immediately to prevent deterioration of its psychic properties. Preservation requires specialized storage units that maintain specific conditions of temperature, psychic resonance, and chemical environment. Once harvested, the psychic skin becomes the primary component in WH40K pattern anti-warp hulls. The kin have perfected techniques for treating and integrating void whale skin into ship construction, creating vessels with natural resistance to warp predation that complements conventional Gellerfield technology. Ships built with WH40K pattern hulls can navigate warp routes considered too dangerous for conventional vessels, traveling through regions where warp storms and demonic entities would destroy unprotected craft. But the psychic skin represents only one of many valuable materials found in void whale corpses. The bones, massive structures sometimes larger than hab blocks, possess unusual crystalline properties that make them valuable for certain advanced technologies. Kin craftsmen can process void whale bone into components for precision instruments, psychic amplifiers, and structural materials for buildings that must withstand extreme environmental conditions. The organs present their own harvesting challenges and opportunities. Some void whale organs contain concentrated warp energies even after death, pulsing with power that persists for years or decades after the host's demise. These organs must be extracted with extreme caution, as their unstable energies can kill or corrupt those who handle them improperly. But properly contained, they serve as power sources, psychic batteries, or components in devices that manipulate warp energies. The flesh itself, though radioactive and inedible, has uses in certain industrial processes. The radioactive isotopes, concentrated in void whale tissues, can be extracted and refined, providing materials for weapons, power generation, or other applications where controlled radioactivity serves a purpose. The sheer volume of flesh in a single void whale corpse means that even low concentrations of useful isotopes translate into substantial quantities of refined materials. Harvesting operations must also contend with the parasites that inhabited the void whale in life. The remora, cruovar, and other organisms do not always die immediately when their host expires. They may survive for days, weeks, or even months within the corpse, particularly if it retains residual heat or biological activity. These creatures pose significant dangers to harvesting teams, occasionally emerging from deep within the carcass to attack workers. The kin have developed protocols for dealing with parasitic threats. Before full-scale harvesting begins, extermination teams sweep through accessible portions of the corpse, using flamers, explosives, and other weapons to clear out any surviving parasites. But the dimensional pockets and impossible geometry within void whale bodies mean that complete extermination is nearly impossible. Harvesters work with constant vigilance, weapons ready, knowing that a remora or cruovar might emerge from any shadow or unexplored chamber. One documented incident, referenced in Leagues of Votan records, describes a mining site called the Far Market being plagued by cruovar that emerged periodically from deep within the void whale corpse. These worm-like creatures, some reportedly dozens of meters long, would tunnel through processed areas and destabilize mining structures, forcing kin forces to respond with military action. The cruovar infestations persisted for months, the creatures apparently able to survive on residual organic matter within the corpse, possibly even feeding on the harvesting equipment or kin waste products. Beyond the Leagues of Votan, other factions also harvest void whale corpses when opportunities arise. Rogue traders, those independent Imperial operators who roam the galaxy's fringes seeking profit and adventure, sometimes stumble upon void whale carcasses in uncharted regions. These entrepreneurs recognize the potential, value, and organize salvage operations, though they typically lack the Votan's sophisticated processing technology. Instead, they focus on extracting the most obviously valuable components, leaving the rest to drift in space. Chaos forces show occasional interest in void whale remains, particularly those that died while corrupted by warp energies. The corpse of a Nurgle-touched void whale might contain organs saturated with plague, tissues that can be harvested and weaponized or used in dark rituals. Chaos sorcerers value the psychic components of void whale biology, using bones, neural tissue, and warp-reactive organs in ceremonies that further their blasphemous goals. Even the Mechanicus, that faction of the Imperium dedicated to the study and worship of technology, conducts research on void whale corpses when they can acquire specimens. Mechanicus genitors seek to understand void whale biology, to classify and catalogue these creatures in accordance with their drive to comprehend all knowledge. Their research has provided much of what the Imperium knows about void whale anatomy, though Mechanicus' reluctance to share knowledge means that most of their findings remain locked in archives, accessible only to the highest-ranking tech priests. The economic impact of void whale harvesting creates markets and incentives that ensure continued hunting of these creatures. A single well-preserved void whale corpse can provide materials worth fortunes, sustaining entire communities through years of processing and sale of harvested components. This economic reality means that even factions that might otherwise have no interest in void whales become invested in killing them, seeing each massive corpse as an opportunity for profit. What makes this exploitation particularly grim is its systematic nature. Void whales are not harvested out of necessity or survival, but out of profit motive and technological advantage. The galaxy possesses other materials, other resources, other means of achieving the goals that void whale components serve. But void whale materials offer unique properties, performance advantages, or cost benefits that incentivize continued hunting and harvesting. The void whales die so that ships can navigate more safely, so that weapons can achieve slightly better performance, so that profits can be marginally increased. And so the cycle continues. Void whales die through violence, accident, or simple misfortune. Their corpses become industrial sites, picked clean by scavengers who see them only as resources. Whatever these creatures were in life, whatever awareness or experience they possessed, becomes irrelevant the moment death claims them. They are reduced to components, raw materials, economic assets in ledgers, kept by beings who never knew them as anything but opportunities for exploitation. Warp transit, navigating nightmare currents. Perhaps no aspect of void whale existence better demonstrates their alien nature than their ability to navigate the warp, that impossible realm where physical laws become suggestions and madness seeps into everything that dares enter. The warp, also called the Imperium, the Sea of Souls, or dozens of other names across the galaxy, represents a dimension that underlies reality itself, a realm of pure psychic energy where thoughts become tangible and emotions take on murderous substance. For most life forms, entering the warp unprotected means instant death, or worse, transformation into something that no longer resembles the being that entered. Yet void whales swim through these nightmare currents with apparent ease, their natural biology providing protections that most species can only achieve through advanced technology or powerful psychic shielding. The mechanism by which void whales enter and exit the warp remains poorly understood, a source of considerable frustration for Mechanicus researchers who wish to replicate or understand this ability. Unlike Imperial ships, which require warp drives and Gellerfield generators to make the transition, void whales simply seem to will themselves between dimensions. Observers report that the transition is not instantaneous, but occurs over a period of seconds or minutes, the void whale's body becoming increasingly translucent or insubstantial before vanishing entirely from real space sensors. What the void whale experiences during this transition, if it experiences anything, cannot be known. Does the shift between dimensions cause pain, disorientation, fear? Or is this transition so natural to void whale biology that they no more notice crossing into the warp than a fish notices moving between different layers of ocean water? The questions remain unanswered, but the fact that void whales continue to make these transitions suggests that at minimum, the process is not immediately fatal or so traumatic as to discourage repetition. The protective mechanism that allows void whales to survive warp exposure has been studied extensively, particularly by those seeking to replicate its effects for human use. As discussed earlier, void whale skin contains complex neural meshes that, when stimulated by the creature's nervous system, generate a psychic field surrounding the entire body. This field functions analogously to a Geller field, creating a barrier between the void whale's physical form and the predatory entities, reality warping energies, and temporal distortions that characterize the warp. The activation of this protective field represents a remarkable feat of biological engineering, whether that engineering was the work of evolution, warp energies, or something else entirely. The void whale's brain and secondary nerve ganglia send specific patterns of electrical and psychic signals through the neural mesh in its skin. These signals synchronize across the creature's entire surface, creating a harmonized resonance that manifests as a defensive bubble of stable reality around the whale's body. Within this bubble, the void whale can maintain its physical integrity and biological processes, even while swimming through a dimension where such things normally become impossible. But this protection is far from perfect. The warp is a corrosive environment, hostile to material existence in fundamental ways. Extended exposure to warp energies causes changes even in protected organisms, subtle at first, but accumulating over time until the effects become obvious and often horrifying. Void whales that spend too long in the warp begin to show signs of mutation and corruption, their bodies warped by energies that slip past or through their psychic defenses. The void whale that Engia Krakendoom's space wolves destroyed near Perilia exemplified these corruption effects. That creature had spent so long swimming through the Imperium that the boundary between its physical form and its warp-touched essence had begun to break down. Its flesh had taken on qualities impossible in normal biology, developing structures that existed partially in real space and partially in the warp. Its internal geometry had become labyrinthine and impossible, spaces folding in on themselves in ways that violated Euclidean principles. Even its parasites had become corrupted, the remora populations within its body transforming into more virulent and aggressive variants. The 7 void whales that wandered into Nurgle's garden represent the extreme end of warp corruption. These creatures, through whatever circumstances led them into the plague god's domain, became so thoroughly saturated with chaos energies that they could no longer be considered simply void whales. They had become extensions of Nurgle's will, living plague vectors that carried fragments of the garden itself wherever they traveled. The corruption was total, permanent, and transformative, changing them from biological entities into demonic hybrids that served chaos purposes. But even void whales that avoid such extreme corruption show evidence of warp exposure's effects. The radioactivity that characterizes their flesh might itself be a product of repeated warp transits, dimensional energies leaving permanent marks on their tissues. The dimensional pockets and impossible spaces within their bodies almost certainly develop or expand through warp exposure, reality becoming less stable within them with each journey through the Imperium. Over time, a void whale's body might become increasingly alien, less purely material, and more a hybrid of flesh and warp stuff. The navigation methods void whales use while in the warp represent another profound mystery. Human ships require navigators, specialized mutants who possess the ability to perceive the Astronomicon and chart courses through the warp's chaotic currents. Without navigators, human vessels become lost in the Imperium, drifting for years or centuries, or simply vanishing into dimensions from which nothing returns. Yet void whales navigate, without any apparent guidance system, somehow finding their way through the warp to emerge at their desired destinations, or at least at locations that don't immediately kill them. Some xenobiologists theorize that void whales possess innate psychic abilities that allow them to sense warp currents and navigate by instinct. Others suggest they follow routes carved into the warp by previous transits, the psychic equivalent of migratory paths that animals follow on conventional worlds. Still others propose that void whales don't actually navigate in any purposeful sense, but simply drift through the warp until they happen to emerge somewhere, making their apparent ability to reach desired destinations nothing more than selection bias. Observers only see the whales that successfully arrived, not the countless others that became lost or destroyed. The temporal distortions of warp travel affect void whales just as they affect ships. A void whale might enter the warp intending to cross a relatively short distance and emerge days, weeks, or years after it departed real space. Alternatively, it might complete what should be a years-long journey in mere hours of subjective time. The void whale's experience of time during warp transit is unknowable, but the fact that they survive these temporal distortions suggests some degree of adaptation to experiencing time non-linearly. The dangers void whales face in the warp extend beyond simple corruption and mutation. The Imperium is home to entities that view any material being as prey, food, or toys to be tormented. Demons of all descriptions hunt through the warp, drawn to concentrations of psychic energy, like sharks to blood in water. A void whale's protective field, while effective at maintaining the creature's physical integrity, also marks it as a target, a beacon of stable reality in the chaotic currents that demons find either offensive or appetizing. Combat between void whales and warp entities has been reported by various sources, though the reliability of these reports varies wildly. Ship crews have claimed to witness battles in the warp between massive entities, seeing void whales wrapped in the tentacles of things that have no name, watching as psychic energies clash with biological reality in struggles that last subjective hours or objective centuries. Whether these reports represent actual events or hallucinations induced by warp exposure remains uncertain, but they suggest that void whales' journeys through the Imperium are far from peaceful migrations. The question of why void whales travel through the warp at all, given the dangers involved, lacks definitive answer. The warp provides the only practical means of crossing interstellar distances in reasonable timeframes. A void whale limited to real space travel would require centuries or millennia to migrate between star systems. By using the warp, they can cross these distances in days or weeks, accessing feeding grounds and migration, routes that would otherwise be impossible to reach. But whether void whales understand this calculation, whether they choose to accept warp travel's risks in exchange for its benefits, or whether they simply follow instincts programmed into their biology, no one can say. What is certain is that every warp transit changes the void whale making it, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically, but always permanently. Each journey through the Imperium leaves its mark, adding to the accumulation of corruption, mutation, and transformation that eventually defines these creatures as much as their original biology. The void whale that emerges from the warp is never quite the same as the one that entered, and over the centuries of its existence, these changes compound until the creature bears only passing resemblance to what it might have been had it remained forever in real space. Notable encounters and battles throughout imperial history and the records of other factions, scattered accounts, document encounters between various forces and void whales. These incidents, ranging from minor observations to full-scale battles, provide fragmentary glimpses into how different groups interact with these creatures and how void whales respond or fail to respond to the attention they receive. Each encounter tells its own story of exploitation, violence, or simple observation, adding pieces to the incomplete picture we possess of void whale existence. The Battle of Perilia, already discussed in detail, remains the most thoroughly documented encounter between Imperial forces and a void whale. But it is far from the only such incident. Imperial Navy records contain numerous references to void whale sightings and interactions, though most of these reports are fragmentary or incomplete, filed away in archives where they gather dust while the galaxy burns around them. One particularly notable incident involved the Orc war boss, Asgra the Slasher, whose entire warband was reportedly devoured by what records describe as an errant void whale. The circumstances of this encounter remain unclear from available sources. Did the void whale actively hunt Asgra's warband, approaching them with predatory intent? Or did the orcs, in their enthusiasm for violence, attack what they thought was prey, only to discover themselves outmatched? The fact that an entire orc warband was destroyed suggests either that the void whale in question possessed unusual aggressive capabilities, or that the orcs encountered it under circumstances that prevented escape. Some accounts suggest that certain void whales may possess what appears to be a planet hanging from their mouths, an anglerfish-like lure designed to attract prey. These reports describe void whales drifting through space with what seems to be a small moon or planetoid suspended from structures in or around their feeding apertures. Ships drawn to investigate what appears to be an uncharted world suddenly find themselves approaching the mouth of a vast predator, realizing the truth only when it's too late to escape. The validity of these accounts remains questionable, with many researchers dismissing them as exaggerations or misidentifications. But the persistence of such stories across multiple independent sources suggests at least some basis in reality. If void whales do employ lures, it would represent a sophistication to their behavior that contradicts most assumptions about their intelligence. It would suggest active hunting rather than passive feeding, conscious deception rather than instinctive reaction. An angler-like lure would require the void whale to maintain its position for extended periods, waiting for prey to investigate, then striking with speed and precision. Such behavior implies both patience and predatory planning, qualities difficult to reconcile with the image of void whales as essentially passive migrants through space. The Tyranid encounters with void whales, while mentioned earlier in the context of predation, deserve additional examination for what they reveal about void whale behavior under threat. Tyranid bioships that have engaged void whales report, through whatever psychic emanations allow the hive mind to communicate, that void whales attempt to flee when confronted by hive fleet elements. This flight response suggests that void whales possess some ability to detect danger and react to it, that they are not simply mindless biological automatons, but possess at least rudimentary threat recognition capabilities. The speeds achieved by void whales during these flight attempts have been measured by various sources, and the results vary wildly. Some reports suggest void whales can accelerate to substantial fractions of light speed when fleeing predators, their massive bodies moving with sudden urgency that belies their usual languid progress through space. Other observations show void whales maintaining relatively slow speeds, even under attack, suggesting either that some specimens cannot achieve high velocity, or that the ability to accelerate depends on factors like the whale's health, age, or recent feeding. Chaos forces have also encountered void whales, though their records are less reliable and often contaminated by the madness that defines service to the ruinous powers. Chaos warbands have reported using void whale carcasses as temporary bases, establishing camps within the massive corpses while they conduct raids on nearby systems. These makeshift fortifications provide substantial protection from incoming fire and can be difficult to detect, as void whale remains often register on sensors as natural phenomena rather than potential threats. One particularly disturbing account describes a chaos sorcerer who somehow kept a void whale alive while systematically harvesting its organs for ritual use. The creature, trapped by warp energies it could not escape, remained conscious throughout the extended torture, its psychic emanations of pain and distress, drawing warp entities to the location, like moths to flame. The sorcerer supposedly continued this exploitation for years before the void whale finally expired or the sorcerer was killed by rival chaos forces. Whether this account represents actual events or is simply one more horror story in a galaxy filled with them cannot be verified. But its existence in chaos records suggests at minimum that such practices are considered possible within their ranks. The Leagues of Votan maintain extensive databases on void whale sightings and carcass locations, treating this information as valuable economic intelligence. Their records document hundreds of void whale encounters across the centuries, noting sizes, apparent health, migration routes, and other data relevant to future harvesting operations. These databases represent the most comprehensive collection of void whale information in the galaxy, though the kin's reluctance to share this intelligence with other factions means that most of it remains inaccessible to Imperial researchers. Eldar interactions with void whales, such as they are documented, suggest that the ancient race views these creatures with a mixture of pity and distaste. Eldar, who have commented on void whales, describe them as wounds in the fabric of being, entities whose very existence represents a kind of cosmic mistake or accident. Whether this reflects actual Eldar philosophy or simply the opinions of individuals is unclear. But the Eldar's general practice of avoiding void whales when possible and destroying them efficiently when necessary suggests that whatever pity they might feel does not extend to preservation or protection. The Tau, relative newcomers to the galactic community, have only recently begun encountering void whales as their expansion brings them into regions where these creatures migrate. Tau records describe attempts to study void whales using long-range sensors and observation drones, though these studies have produced limited results. The Tau's general philosophy of incorporating useful species into the greater good apparently does not extend to void whales, whom they classify as navigational hazards to be avoided, rather than potential resources or allies. A life without purpose. Philosophical grimdark. To contemplate the existence of a void whale is to confront one of the Warhammer 40,000 universe's most fundamental philosophical questions. What is the value of life that serves no purpose beyond its own continuation? The void whale exists in a state that challenges our understanding of what it means to live, to suffer, to endure. These creatures possess no culture, no society, no apparent goals beyond the basic biological imperatives of feeding, migrating, and perhaps reproducing. They build nothing, create nothing, contribute nothing to the galaxy except their own massive presence and the resources their bodies provide upon death. The void whale has no allies. It belongs to no faction, serves no master, fights for no cause. When the Imperium goes to war against chaos, when orcs rampage across entire sectors, when tyrannid hive fleets devour worlds, the void whale continues its lonely migration, unaware and uncaring about the titanic struggles happening around it. It is not good or evil, not loyal or traitorous, not even neutral in any meaningful sense. It simply is, existing in a state of pure being that knows nothing of the moral categories that define the galaxy's endless conflicts. This lack of allegiance or purpose makes the void whale one of the few truly innocent beings in the 41st millennium. It has committed no crimes, waged no wars, perpetrated no atrocities. Its existence harms no one, except through the unfortunate reality that its massive body represents both a navigational hazard and a valuable resource. Yet this innocence provides no protection, earns no mercy, generates no sympathy that might spare it from exploitation and destruction. The void whale dies not because of what it has done, but simply because it exists in a galaxy where existence itself is sufficient reason for something to be killed. The grinding horror of void whale existence lies in its futility. These creatures endure unimaginable hardships, surviving in environments that would kill anything else instantly, navigating through dimensions that drive lesser beings mad, hosting ecosystems of parasites that feed on them without providing any benefit in return. They suffer radiation poisoning from their own tissues, corruption from warp exposure, wounds from predators and hunters. And for what? What does the void whale gain from all this suffering? What purpose does its existence serve beyond perpetuating its own species, assuming they even reproduce? The void whale cannot improve its condition. It cannot build tools to protect itself, cannot develop technologies to ease its burden, cannot negotiate alliances or treaties with the forces that hunt it. It is trapped by its own biology in a cycle of suffering that admits no escape. From birth, if void whales are born rather than spontaneously generated by the warp, to death, whether by violence or natural causes, the void whale knows only isolation, hardship, and struggle. Some might argue that the void whale's lack of apparent intelligence or consciousness means it cannot truly suffer, that without the capacity for self-awareness, the hardships it endures carry no moral weight. But this argument assumes facts, not in evidence. The void whale possesses a brain, generates psychic emanations suggesting some form of consciousness, and responds to threats in ways that suggest at least rudimentary awareness. Whether this constitutes suffering in any sense we would recognize remains unknowable, but the possibility cannot be dismissed simply because it would be more comfortable to believe these creatures feel nothing. Consider the alternative perspective. What if void whales do possess awareness, consciousness, even something approaching sentience? What if they experience each parasite's bite, each weapon's strike, each moment of isolation and endless wandering? What if, within that massive brain, there exists something like loneliness, fear, pain? The void whale cannot communicate these experiences, cannot cry out for help or plead for mercy. It can only endure, continuing its migration through space, while hoping somehow to survive another day. The void whale represents a powerful symbol of the Warhammer 40,000 universe's essential cruelty. In a setting where even the mightiest heroes are trapped in endless war, where no victory is permanent and no peace possible, the void whale reminds us that suffering is not limited to those who fight in wars or serve dark gods. Suffering pervades the entire galaxy, touching even beings so remote from the main conflicts that they should be immune to its effects. The void whale shows us that in the 41st millennium, there is truly no escape from horror, no safe distance, no way to avoid being consumed by the galaxy's grinding machinery of death and exploitation. This futility extends even to the void whale's death. When a void whale dies, whether by violence or natural causes, its body does not return to nature in any conventional sense. There is no ecosystem to recycle its nutrients, no soil to enrich, no cycle of life and death that gives its existence meaning in retrospect. Instead, its corpse becomes industrial raw material, harvested and processed by beings who never knew it as anything but resources. The void whale's death serves purposes that have nothing to do with its life, its body reduced to components that will be used to build ships, weapons and tools in service of wars it never knew about and causes it could never understand. The reproductive cycle of void whales, assuming they reproduce at all, remains so poorly understood that we cannot even say with certainty that the species perpetuates itself through biological means. If void whales do reproduce, what kind of existence do their young face? Are they born already massive and must somehow survive infancy while vulnerable to countless predators? Or do they begin small and grow to their enormous size over centuries, meaning that most never survive to adulthood? Either scenario suggests high mortality rates and the likelihood that most potential void whales never achieve their full lifespan. The great gathering of void whales that supposedly occurs in certain nebulae every few centuries might represent breeding events, times when these solitary creatures overcome their isolation long enough to reproduce. But even if this gathering exists, it means that void whales spend the vast majority of their existence alone, knowing companionship only rarely and briefly. The rest of their lives, possibly spanning centuries or millennia, pass in complete isolation, with no contact with others of their kind. This, enforced, loneliness takes on tragic dimensions when considered against the void whale's apparent inability to die peacefully. Most void whales do not expire from old age, surrounded by their kind, or at least in some form of comfort. They die violently, torn apart by weapons fire, devoured by tyrannids, corrupted by chaos, or destroyed as navigational hazards. Their deaths are painful, terrifying, and above all, meaningless. They die not because they have completed their life cycle or fulfilled their purpose, but because something stronger decided they should die. What makes the void whale's existence particularly grim is that it cannot even serve as a cautionary tale or teaching example. Who learns from the void whale's suffering? Who is inspired to change their behavior or show mercy to other beings because they witnessed what happens to void whales? No one. The void whale suffers in isolation and obscurity, its pain witnessed only by those who inflict it or exploit it. When the last void whale dies, if such an event ever occurs, the galaxy will continue its wars without noticing or caring. The void whales will be forgotten, just another extinct species in a galaxy that has seen countless others vanish without leaving any mark on history. Yet perhaps in this very meaninglessness lies the void whale's most profound statement about the Warhammer 40,000 universe. These creatures embody the ultimate truth about life in the 41st millennium. Suffering requires no justification, exploitation needs no excuse, and death can come at any moment for any reason or no reason at all. The void whale exists, it suffers, it dies, and none of it matters. And in that terrible revelation, we see reflected the fate of countless beings across the galaxy, all of them struggling to survive in a universe that cares nothing for their existence. Conclusion: the eternal wanderers. We have journeyed through the grim existence of the void whale, exploring its origins in warp-spawned mystery, examining its biology and the ecosystems it unwillingly hosts, witnessing its persecution by countless factions across the galaxy. We have seen how these massive creatures navigate the nightmare currents of the warp, how they fall victim to corruption and mutation, how they are hunted, harvested, and exploited from birth to death and beyond. Through all of this, one truth has remained constant. The void whale knows no peace, finds no safety, receives no mercy from the galaxy it inhabits. The void whale's story is not one of heroism or villainy. These creatures are not protagonists in the grand narrative of Warhammer 40,000's eternal war. They are not champions of the Emperor or servants of chaos, not Xenos invaders or human defenders. They are simply beings trying to exist in a universe designed to destroy them, massive and ancient yet utterly powerless to change their fate. Their tale is one of endurance without purpose, survival without meaning, existence without joy. In the vastness of space, void whales continue their lonely migrations. They drift through the void between stars, feeding on stellar phenomena when they can, fleeing from predators when they must, slowly accumulating the corruption and mutation that mark all things that travel through the warp. They host ecosystems of parasites that feed on them without mercy. They face hunters who see them as trophies, resources, or obstacles to be eliminated. They carry within their bodies the capacity to spread plague or corruption if chaos touches them. And through all of this, they simply continue, driven by whatever imperatives, instincts, or consciousness they possess. The void whale represents something profoundly important about the Warhammer 40,000 universe, something that transcends its immediate narrative role. It shows us that suffering in the 41st millennium is not limited to those who choose sides in the great conflicts, not restricted to soldiers and warriors who knowingly enter battles. Suffering pervades everything, touching even beings so remote from the main storylines that they should be safely ignored. The void whale reminds us that in the grim darkness of the far future, there truly is only war, even for those who want nothing to do with it. These lonely giants will continue their journeys for as long as they exist as a species. They will be born from warp currents or biological reproduction. They will grow to their enormous size. They will migrate across light years of empty space, and they will eventually die, their bodies becoming resources for those who outlive them. Some will live for centuries, possibly millennia. Others will perish young, destroyed before they reach their full size or potential. None will live peacefully. None will know true safety. None will receive the mercy that their innocence should command. Perhaps in the far future, the void whales will disappear entirely, hunted to extinction, corrupted beyond survival, or simply dying out as the galaxy's conditions become increasingly hostile to their existence. When the last void whale perishes, the galaxy will not pause to mourn. The wars will continue, factions will rise and fall, and the great game of survival will play out across countless worlds without any awareness that something ancient and massive has vanished from the cosmos. The void whales will become nothing more than entries in forgotten archives, subjects of abandoned research, memories held only by those who hunted or studied them. Or perhaps void whales are more resilient than they appear. Perhaps their warp-spawned nature means they will continue to manifest as long as the Imperium exists. Perhaps new void whales emerge constantly, replacing those that die, maintaining a population that can never truly be exterminated. In this scenario, the void whale's suffering becomes truly eternal, generation after generation condemned to repeat the same cycle of migration, predation, and death without end or evolution. What we know with certainty is that right now, at this moment, void whales drift through the void. They swim through space with their impossible biology. They navigate the warp with their natural protections. They endure their parasites and their hunters and all the other horrors their existence entails. They continue because they must, because stopping means death, because their biology or instincts or whatever drives them will not permit surrender. And somewhere in the galaxy, an orc fleet spots what they call a fishy and begins preparing for a hunt. Somewhere else, a Tyrannid hive fleet's bioships detect massive concentrations of biomass and alter course to intercept. Leagues of Votan monitoring stations track void whale corpses and calculate optimal harvesting schedules. Chaos forces eye void whales as potential vectors for corruption or components for dark rituals. The Imperium logs their positions as navigational hazards, and the void whales, unaware or uncaring about all these threats, continue their endless journeys through the cold and empty dark. If you found this exploration of void whale existence compelling, if you've been moved by the tragedy of these cosmic titans, or horrified by the casual cruelty they endure, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are countless other grim tales to tell about the Warhammer 40,000 universe, countless other beings whose existence embodies the setting's fundamental darkness. By subscribing, you'll journey with me through more of these stories, exploring the horror and tragedy that defines life in the 41st millennium. The void whales swim on, silent witnesses to a galaxy at war, their massive forms cutting through vacuum that has never known peace. They carry with them their parasites, their wounds, their accumulating corruption, all the marks of lives lived in constant hardship. They are the forgotten giants, the exploited titans, the eternal wanderers who know no home and find no rest. And in their lonely, endless migration, they embody perhaps the most fundamental truth about the Warhammer 40,000 universe. that suffering needs no purpose, cruelty requires no justification, and existence itself is often the only crime necessary to warrant destruction. This has been the grim life of a void whale in space, in Warhammer 40K. May we never forget these lonely titans, even as the galaxy that destroys them continues to turn.